So welcome everyone. I'm Marek Niedzwiedz, founder and CEO of AXA Group of Companies and author of The Last Industry. Thank you for joining us today for what I believe and Callum believes will be one of the most candid and valuable conversations you will hear this year, or maybe even if you in your lifetime, especially if you are a founder, a leader, or someone aiming to shape companies at board level. Today's session is about more than just a business story. It's about what happens when everything, and I mean everything, goes wrong in a single moment, just like that, and what it takes to rebuild from zero. We are living in a world. We say we're living in a world where reputation can be destroyed overnight, and resilience is probably the most undervalued leadership trait. Thus, we need real stories, not theory, and that's why I'm honored to introduce Gerald Ratner, a man who built one of the UK's most iconic retail empire, a global empire, and lost it in an instant, and somehow came back stronger. You will hear that today. His story is not just infamous, as some say. It's instructive. His business is still around, as you know, guys. We all know his brands. We buy stuff from his brands. Currently owned by the multi-billion company listed in New York Stock Exchange. Alongside me today is Callum Laing. Hi, Callum, founder of Veblen Directors, a platform for those looking to serve on boards or build better ones. He will be co-hosting, keeping us sharp and asking very tough questions as well. So here is how today will work. You will hear Gerard's story in his own words. Then we will go deeper into the lessons, the mistakes, the comeback questions, and what it all means specifically in today's climate. You will also have the chance to ask questions live, real practical questions. Please be tough, please be practical, because to be honest, you won't hear answered this anywhere else. And finally, I encourage you to stay curious, to follow up, reach out to Gerald if you're interested in his mentorship program, for example. Explore Veblen community if board roles are your next step. And if you're looking to discuss the bigger shifts shaping our economy and leadership today, reach out to me as well. So, okay, let's get into, before I turn to Gerald, Callum, would you like to add something or maybe share what you are looking to get from today's event?
Yeah, look, I'm very excited. We were just talking about this earlier. So although I was born in New Zealand, I grew up in the UK. I was a young entrepreneur, and so I had an ice cream business around the time that Ratner's was huge, and I was aspiring to be a big entrepreneur like Gerald and Richard Branson and Anita Roddick and some of those other key names in the 80s and 90s. But I was just mentioning before we went live that when this all went down, I was actually a paper boy, and I was delivering newspapers to Ratner's jewelry store in Cambridge in Lion Yard. So I remember this incident very, very well. And I'm very excited to hear it directly from Gerald and what he's learned from it. And I've got some interesting questions for afterwards as well. So really looking forward to this.
Such a story. Okay, I'm not that old like you. But anyway, Gerald, up to you. Please share your story in your own words, 5-10 minutes, and we can probably dive into the questions.
Yes, thank you, Marek and Callum. I have to take you back quite a long time now, when I was at school and not doing very well. And my father said, "Well, you're not going to get anywhere in school. You might as well work for me." And at the time, he had six shops, jewelry shops. And it was what I always wanted to do. I feel that if you brought up in a family business, it's better than an MBA. You learn more about business that way than any other way. And they were always, my parents were always talking shop. And that's what I wanted to do. And I left and worked in the shop, one of his shops. He didn't give me did any favors. I was like the gopher that had to deliver all the stock. And he was right to do that because that stood me in good stead for the future. I honestly believe that in any business, you're better off starting at the bottom and working your way up. And it took me a long time to work my way up. As I said, I started there at 15, and it wasn't until I was 35 that I took the reins of the business. And I took the reins of the business because it was actually doing quite badly, losing about £30,000. And my father was quite ill. And I just felt that it wasn't going to survive. So I decided to persuade him, which was not an easy thing. You can imagine when he started this business. And I did it a little bit by trickery, by saying that his brothers felt it was better for him to retire. And I said to his brothers that he wanted to retire. And I knew that I'd be safe making up this story because he didn't at the time speak to his brothers. So often you get this in family businesses. So anyway, I took over and felt that we had to make a dramatic change in the business. We were like every other jeweler, very posh, chandeliers, thick carpets, bars on the windows, doors locked, everything very expensive. Jewelers in those days, in the 1970s, felt that they should look very prestigious, look like banks. But I don't claim to come up with this idea myself, but there were jewellers called Robert Anthony who had a shop in Newcastle and one in Sunderland who had heard about was doing very well. So I went up to visit him and he had queues outside the door, and this was unheard of in the jewelry business. And he was selling basically cheaper products, lightweight earrings, gold chains, and he was marketing it very heavily with posters and playing pop music and sandwich boards. And he was really hitting the young demographic, which at the time were the 16 to 24s that had the money. Now it's the older people, but then they were the people with the disposable income. So I basically copied him and also added to the mix. I put in a lot of discounting, which everybody does today. But nobody did in those days, especially not in the jewelry business, because they felt it would wreck your image. But I did everything to wreck the image, but because I felt there was a threshold barrier there with young people who would be scared to go into a jeweler's because they feel it was too expensive. So I tried to do everything to change that by getting rid of the doors altogether and playing pop music like Robert Anthony did, offering much lower prices, taking out the expensive diamond rings and putting in earrings that they would buy on impulse that Saturday afternoon and wear for a party that evening. And it became, even though it was scorned upon and everybody said, well, you've ruined your father's business and it's cheap and cheerful. But we took phenomenal amount of money. Suddenly we were making profit rather than losing money. And I built that up to about 200 shops. And then I was looking at H. Samuel, who had 600 shops by the time we were in the 80s. And they were really doing things the way we used to do it, and they were not making any money, even though they owned a third of their shops, their freeholds. They were still not making profit. It was just quite unbelievable. So I felt that we wanted that as a platform to expand on. I always believe it's much easier to acquire a business than open up organically. So everyone was after the H. Samuel business because of the fact that they own their properties. But I went along and saw him and more or less sold it to him as a merger, and he would be chairman of the new company. I'd be chief executive. It was a merger, and we'd call it H. Samuel Ratner's. And even then, he was very reticent. But in the end, I persuaded him. And of course, I fired him 3 months later and ended up with 600 shops. And when I put the formula into the H. Samuel shops that I'd done with Ratner's, I found that results were even better than we were getting at Ratner's. And whilst H. Samuel were making 2 or 3 million when I took them over within a year, and this can happen in retail, because if you get the product right, things can change very quickly. You change the product on a Wednesday, you sell it on a Saturday. We turned the H. Samuel business into a £65 million profit that first year. Because of the fact the overheads were low, because we weren't paying rent, and we got the turnover massively up with those fixed costs. And H. Samuel had a better name than Ratner's. It had better shops. They were bigger, incredible locations. And that then led me on to buy Ernest Jones, Watch of Switzerland, Zales, Leslie Davis, because the jewelers, and they're like this to this day, they feel prestige is more important than profit. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's the way it was. And so through acquisition, we ended up with 50% of the jewelry market, and we were really in a fantastic position. And we were then told by our investors that although your shares have gone up from 20p to £4.30, and they were the best performing share of 1986 on the whole stock market, your ex-growth, because although you've now got 50% of the jewelry market, you're not going to get to more than that. So your growth is not, you've been doubling your profits for the last 7 years. You're not going to do that anymore. So you either have to diversify or go abroad. So I listened to the shareholders, and however successful our formula was, and it was the most successful formula because we were taking more money than any other retailer in Europe per square foot, I decided that we would go to America, but we wouldn't transport our formula because of all the retailers from Marks and Spencer's downwards that had failed going across the Atlantic, simply because the market in the States is totally different from the UK. They spend a lot more, they buy it on credit, they examine the product before they buy it. It's just, they might speak the same language as us, but their behavior is totally different. So I didn't want to make that mistake, and instead I paid a huge amount of money for 125 shops. 125 million pounds I paid for it, and let them, but they were the best performing jeweler. And I found that out by simply speaking to mall owners who, unlike the UK, we won't tell you anything, told me exactly what everybody's sales figures were, because the Americans are like that. They're not defensive about anything. And so I had the base for a really good business. And basically today, I mean, that business is now 3 or 4 billion Signet in America. It's exactly the same business. Started off with those 125 shops, just doing more acquisitions. I took it to 1,000 shops in America and was one of the few British retailers to succeed there. So everything was going, you're waiting here for the twist in this story. And everything was going swimmingly and fantastically, and you get invited to come to the Albert Hall if you are the main performing businessman that year. And I was very honored to do that, and wrote a speech which took me quite a while. And then I made the mistake of actually circulating it to my colleagues, which is something I never did. I was fairly autocratic. But because it was such an important thing, I wanted to know their opinion on the speech. And one of them said, well, it's a great speech, but you need to put in a couple of jokes. So I said, well, the joke that always works is that we sell a pair of earrings for £100, 99p, same price as a Marks and Spencer's prawn sandwich, but the sandwich would probably last longer than our earrings, which was quite a funny joke, which I would have got away with if I hadn't then put in the other joke, which was We sell a sherry decanter with 6 cut glasses on a silver plated tray that your butler can serve you, and it only costs £9.95p. Why can we sell it for such a low price? My answer was, or the joke was, it's not a very funny joke because it's total crap. And of course, the press then reported it, and you remember this, Callum, because you were delivering the papers at that time. They reported it that I said all my jewelry's crap, and that I built my success on crap, and they were totally disingenuous, which they have been to this day. But there's no point in me blaming the press. If you call one of your products crap, I accept by implication that people assume that everything you sell is crap. And then all the success that we had was completely reversed. Everyone was coming for refunds, because jewelry is sort of unbranded, and the brand is the fascia above it, and the H Samuel, the Ratner's name, and Ratner's suddenly started doing really badly. And then they discovered I owned H Samuel, and they started suffering, and then the other shops. And instead of making the £200 million profit, which was forecast for us in 1991, 1992, I remember going to the bank and saying that we're not going to make the £200 million profit. We're going to miss it by about 300 million, which is what I did. So that's the effect that that speech had, and still has on me this day, because it's something that you're defined by. But I've tried to make the most of it. I do a lot of speeches talking about it, warning other companies about the dangers of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And the press have become even more difficult, if you like, and looking for mistakes from politicians and people in show business and business. So it ends up now people say nothing. They just say a lot of things that add up to nothing. But anyway, I made the most of it, and I found that actually the notoriety can work in your favor, because when I was lost my job completely, I was doing a lot of exercise, and I felt I wanted to go into health club business, but I didn't have any money. But I found a site in Henley, and it was going to cost me £750,000, the building, which I didn't have. But I put it into solicitors' hands and announced that I was opening this health club in the next 3 months, and I would waive the joining fee if they joined before I opened it. And this was a way of me just generating some cash so I could actually buy it. If you like, I was selling the bearskin before I shot the bear. So on the basis of this non-existent club, I got 750 people to sign up, which got me the investment to open up the club and sell it 2 years later for £3.9 million. And all health clubs are pretty much the same, but the reason mine was very successful is because everybody knew about it, because it had so much publicity, because it was me. It was all bad publicity, but if you're in the health club business, it's basically you just have to get as many people to know about it as possible. So I realized that this notoriety can work for me, and I then went into online business, which became very successful. And of course, I do a lot of mentoring now and public speaking, and people say, well, you're very resilient, you've fought back, you've made a big comeback. But my business today, or my income today, is nothing like what it was. I was earning £850,000 a year, plus, and that was 30 years ago. And by the way, the £200 million profit that we were going to make, that's like £1 billion profit today. There's not many retailers making that. So there's no way that I've got back to where I was, but I am much happy. I know I don't look happy, that's my face, but I am happy because somehow you have to lose everything to appreciate things. So
yeah,
that's where I am today.
right.
It's an incredible story. I mean, just like the, I know everyone wants to talk about the disastrous bit, but the growth story itself is incredible. So look, I've got one question. Actually, let me. There's a question that came in from Paul, one of our members, that is something that I've wondered. So he asks, do you feel, and I think this is One of the things that even struck me at the age of 13 was how this didn't leave the front pages for a long time. It was a really big story in the UK for a very long time, for what to most people wouldn't it didn't seem like that big a deal, but it did seem to sort of stay knocking around for a long time. So Paul was asking, do you think that was sort of part of the establishment, the you challenging the perception of jewelry in the past, and kind of your background that was working against you? Was it just a slow news month in the UK? Was it the typical UK build someone up and then tear them down again approach? What do you think led to just the amount of media coverage that you got? Because it did seem a little bit disproportionate to those of us on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't left the papers even today. Here we are talking about it 34 years later. It ticks all the boxes. It's gives somebody to blame for their shortcomings. And I think that, the fact that I'd made that joke, and they were old jokes, the prawn sandwich and the show, they were old jokes I'd made in 1987, and they were printed in the newspaper, and there was nothing that anybody criticized about. They were quite regarded as quite amusing. But in 1991, we were in a deep recession. People couldn't pay their electricity bills, and they were looking for somebody to blame, just like they did with the banking crisis with Fred Goodwin. So I was the guy who stood up, rich, somebody, with houses and boats and planes, rich, making money out of, which is complete, rubbish, trying to exploit the people who don't have very much money, making fun of them. All of that is something that they absolutely loved. I mean, I read a survey yesterday which said that they asked people who couldn't pay their bills, who are struggling at the moment, whether they believe politicians lie. And 72% of them said yes. But then they asked a lot of people who are comfortable, who could pay their bills, and they only believe that politicians lie 40% of the time. So basically, when people have a go at you and criticize you, it's because they're not in a good place themselves. And I think that people were not in a good place in 1991. The Sun newspaper, which had 17 million readers at the time, there was no social media, were very powerful. They went to town on it, as did the Daily Mirror. They're poor readers, here I was making fun of them. So it's a classic story which people love, about bringing down successful people, because people like reading it because they're not successful.
It's interesting. I thought of you a couple of weeks ago when there was the Coldplay concert. And
Yeah, I've been asked about that.
Again, like a completely disproportionate amount of media for something that happened. But
Well, again, people getting a lot of pleasure, because they wouldn't have got that if
it
they were
wasn't
just
them.
a bin man, and somebody who worked at a checkout in Tesco. That wouldn't that wouldn't have ticked the boxes. That wouldn't have given you a feel good factor. But the fact that he's 150 million billionaire or whatever, and he's been brought down, and he was having an affair, that's love. They love that. And listen, I'm not blaming the papers. We love it. Let's be honest.
Yeah. All right. So I've
I
got
mean,
to
that was
ask
a funny
you.
story, that Coldplay. I loved it. Yeah, I watched it myself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Look, I've got to ask you from a board perspective, and I have a view on this, but I'd be very interested in your view with, the passage of time that's gone past. Ultimately, your board decided to fire you from the role.
Mhm.
If you could go back now to your and advise your board the day after that news story broke, what advice would you have for the board? Do you think they did the right thing? Do you think they could have done something else? What would be your advice now?
Well, you are right, because it is the board that people don't realize this. They think it's the shareholders or the banks. Yeah, they are very powerful, but ultimately you can screw up and still get away with it, as a lot of people do. I won't give any examples to spare people's blushes, but you can stay on the company if you've got the backing of the board. The mistake that I made was that after the speech, I was the chairman and chief executive of the Ratner's group. I decided on advice again. You should be careful about taking advice because people who give it often have a hidden agenda. But I was advised to bring in a chairman with banking experience because we owed so much money. And he fired me, but he couldn't have done that unless he'd brought in 3 non-executive directors of his pals, his chums. So he then, just like when I got rid of the chairman of H. Samuel, I had the board, the majority. He then had the majority. So I learned that lesson. So he got rid of me. In hindsight, was it the right decision? Well, I would obviously say no, on the basis that the fact that America has carried on growing. I was less influential with America. I set it up, but really not really responsible for its success. But the UK has been a disaster. H. Samuel has no longer got 450 shops. It's down. It was 600. It went down to 450. It's now 220. And as far as I know, losing money. Ernest Jones, same. They've got rid of Watches of Switzerland for £25 million. That's now worth 1.7 billion. I wouldn't have done that. Instead of 50% of the jewelry market, they got about 10. I don't believe that would be the case if I was still running it, because I would not try and Americanize it and make it upmarket, because H. Samuel would never be upmarket. I did a lot of damage with that speech. But over the last 30 years, I would have done a lot better than they have done in the UK. So, but people don't get rid of people for the benefit of the company. People get rid of people for the benefit of themselves.
Yeah. I think that's something as an entrepreneur I've seen play out many, many times. And it's one of the things that when we're advising, we work with a community of people that are learning to become board members, and often they're starting at smaller companies. And a lot of people have this perception of boards, of big company boards, that they're there to protect all stakeholders. But oftentimes what happens is board members think that they're there in this kind of protection role, and it becomes about actually protecting themselves. They get pressure from shareholders who, as we all know, are super fickle and obviously don't want to lose money. But the individual that got them to where they are is often the one that can get them out of the problems again, because of the creativity that was shown to get them there in the first place. And I find we see this a lot repeated over and over again. Boards are very quick to get rid of people as soon as there's pressure on them, as opposed to getting behind the founder, coming out with a positive. Another alternative at the time was if the entire board had come out in favor of you and said, look, this was a stupid thing to say, but look at the track record, we're 100% behind him. A couple of the big shareholders had also done that. It would have made your life a lot easier and potentially could have gone a very different way. But the
chairman wanted to be the big shot. There's only room for one big shot on the board, and he wanted to be it. And that's like a reoccurring story in every company. I get people coming to me saying, let's get rid of this guy because he's no good. Let's get rid of the general manager. A manager comes up and says that, let's get rid of the general manager. He's no good. Why is he saying that? Because he wants to be the general manager. He doesn't care about whether it's good for the company or not. So I'm always I know it sounds paranoid, but I'm very, very skeptical when somebody comes to me with advice. I check whether, whose interest this is in. Is it in the company or is it in their interest? It's often in their interest.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, because you mentioned that. Remind us, please, how old were you when you took the business out from your father? You were
34.
Quite young.
Yeah, 34.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So you haven't graduated from any Oxford Business School, anything like this. You not MBA.
I was expelled from my grammar school for being stupid. In those days, now they put a label on you. They'd say you were dyslexic or you ADHD or something. In those days, they say you're stupid. and which actually did me a lot of good because I felt when I was expelled for coming last in class, I needed to go out and prove to the world that I wasn't stupid. It's the worst.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you listen to those two advisors twice. I mean, probably no, but the speech, the joke you did, and obviously later on. So that was the mistake, you did. If you did your way, probably nothing would happen. If you listen just to yourself, be still autocratic rather than going and ask advisors. Is that kind of right, do you think?
Definitely. All my biggest mistakes is listening to other people and acting on them. You've got a gut feeling about things, and often it's a good gut feeling, and you should go by that. And I regret and I listening to people and taking their advice because
I think this is a big lesson from this actually meeting today, guys. Just you've got your good feeling, just follow it. Obviously maybe we've got boards, we've got advisors, we've got consultants, but be very careful of using their knowledge because they always biased. Would you agree?
I'm sure a lot of prime ministers have lost their job because they've been advised by their colleagues.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah,
so I'll just contribute to that. So we had on a much smaller scale had a challenge with a board and paid an absolute fortune for crisis advisors, and their advice was to step down from the board in that particular instance. And it was, again, the worst mistake. The challenge is you never know what's good advice and what's bad advice. And part of ideally having a good board or good people around you is to get a mixture of ideas and opinions so that you can kind of go with what makes the most sense to you. But especially when you're really under the pump and under a lot of pressure, it's very difficult to know which is the right advice to take.
When I was under a huge amount of pressure, I was advised to bring in a special PR company. My PR company resigned, and I was told that I need one of these companies who deal with disasters, and they just dealt with the BP oil slick and that sort of stuff. And they advised me not to speak to the press, and they would deal with it. They would they'd protect me. That was the worst advice ever, because I always had a reputation with the press that I was accessible, available, and they liked that. And they said, when you were doing well, you were very happy to speak to us. Now you're not. And that actually antagonized the press even more. So that advice from supposedly expert people in that field was the worst possible advice I could have.
Another advice. Wow, that's incredible. Callum, do we have any questions from our listeners?
Yeah, so I've got an interesting one from Susie. Is asking, so you mentioned that you're happier now than when you were making when you were making a lot more money. Why do you think that is? Just older, less stress?
No, I think that in a way you have to lose everything to appreciate things more. And when I had all that money and all the trappings and everything like that, it's like these footballers, who are like 23 and they drive around in a Bentley. They feel, if anything, a little bit guilty. They don't really appreciate it. But, somebody who's sort of struggled a lot and had setbacks and worked all their life and then bought a Jaguar at the age of 60 would really appreciate it much more. I just think that you look at anybody that has lost something, it's a reality check in terms of the fact that you really do appreciate it when you get it back, albeit, as I said, my businesses are nothing like the size of what it was. The fact that I lost absolutely everything after that speech because I had tax bills on share options that were worthless. I had to sell my house, 2 houses. I got into debt, and I went through a very difficult period for 7 years. And then when I started, when that made that money from the gym, and then I started making a bit of money back. It really was something that I really, felt great about, because of the fact that for 7 years I couldn't pay my bills. I was totally skinned. So that's me. I don't know if it's the same with anybody else, but
Do you miss playing at the level that you were playing at? Because it can be, when you're making that much money, when you can get into the press whenever you want, like prior to it all going wrong. When you were very well recognized, you could pick up the phone to anyone. Did you kind of miss that once that sort of disappeared as well?
Well, I really missed it straight afterwards, and I missed it for those 7 years. But then I look back in hindsight, and the problem with me was that I was so obsessed with business, which is a good thing for your business, but it's not a good thing for you.
Mm.
And I was very driven, and had this tunnel vision, and business was so exciting. I was opening up shops every day, and I was in the press and being lauded by. I was Retailer of the Year, and all these different things happening every day. There was another present, um, which is a bit pathetic, really. But the problem was that when I got home, I was physically at home, but I was still in the office with my family and wife and stuff like that. And I've learned now that that doesn't particularly make you happy. I did go to the other extreme of spending the whole time at home, and doing all the things I tried to avoid before, like taking the children to pantomimes and stuff and like that. But I've now got a balance. So I've
Correct.
do work, and I've got a home life, and it's much more healthy from my point of view, and that's one of the reasons why I'm happier. I think that if you become obsessed with business, you suffer in terms of your family and your home life, and I don't have that problem. So when you say, do I miss it? Um, when I was running it, I wasn't jumping up and down saying, "Oh, how happy I am."
No.
That's the problem. So, but now I do actually say, now I appreciate stuff now. But I haven't got all that stuff, but I do appreciate what I have got much more.
Yeah. And you said something interesting, which reminded me of a story. So you said that kind of part of what you recognized from the jewelry stores up in the Northeast was that they were basically focusing on profit over prestige, and that most jewelry stores were focused on prestige over profit. And it reminded me of a very good brand manager I knew that was one of the brand managers at Red Bull in the early days, and he actually got poached by the Thai company, the Thai side of Red Bull, to come in and make red wine popular in Thailand. And what was interesting was that everybody that had tried to sell red wine in Thailand had focused on the prestige of red wine, like the story and all of the theater that goes with red wine or wine in Europe and outside. And nobody was drinking it in Thailand. They were all intimidated by it. And so when he came in, this Red Bull brand manager, he basically took all their wine brands and got rid of them and just called it red and white. And he made it a point for 5 years to only ever drink wine out of a plastic cup, to just take away all of the fear that locals had about it. And consequently completely changed, like the amount of wine that got drunk in Thailand went up massively, because just took away this sort of fear that people had. So hearing that story from you, have you not seen, with that kind of epiphany that you had and exploited, have you not seen other areas where you see that same sort of prestige over profit, that you've thought, well, that's an industry that's ripe for approaching?
Well, if you look at the very successful businesses in this country, they're all based on value for money, having no threshold barrier, people feeling comfortable they're going to get a bargain. They don't even check the prices. They go in there knowing. You go into Weatherspoons, you don't check the price. You know you're getting value. You go into Primark, you know you're getting the best value. Go to Lidl or Aldi. These are all the very successful businesses, even Sports Direct. You don't even have to check the prices because they've just got this image that they've created, which is basic. If you go into a Costco, I mean, it's a warehouse. There's no money spent on fittings or wallpaper or nice fittings, and that's all part of it. Because you feel if they're not spending it on that, that you're getting, the prices must be low, which they are. So I'm not saying that is the only thing to do in business, because if you've got a brand at the top end, then life is very easy because you can just milk that brand for all it's worth. You can actually make your product more expensive and more difficult to obtain, like Patek Philippe watches or Hermes bags. You can do De Beers started all this. You create this scarcity. It's completely the opposite. What you don't want to do is be trapped in the middle and aspire to be an expensive brand. And that's what they're doing in this country with H. Samuel. H. Samuel will never be Tiffany's. So they were not, so they really have to be pilot high and sell it cheap to succeed, because that's the brand that H. Samuel is. And it's a very good brand for that, just like Primark is a very good brand for cheap clothes. It's when people try and aspire. I remember years ago, there was a guy called Terence Conran who took over British Home Stores, and he tried to make it upmarket. He called it BHS, and he put in better designer stuff. And what did he do with that? He alienated his base customers who were scared to go into BHS because they were too expensive. But he didn't attract the richer clientele because they would never go into BHS. So what you have to do is you have to realize what the brand stands for and then give them the product that goes with it, which is not what everybody does.
Yeah. Interestingly, the reason the Veblen Director Programme is called Veblen is after Torsten Veblen, the economist who talked about Veblen goods, that the higher the status, the higher, or the higher the price, the higher the perceived status.
Yeah. It's all a load of bollocks, but there you go. I mean, they could manufacture as many Chanel bags as they wanted to if they wanted to, but that would be the big mistake. There's no shortage. They create the shortage.
Yes, that's right. So, Gerald, I know many people here today will be thinking, how can I learn more from you, connect with you, or even maybe work with you? I know you've got this mentorship program, which I've heard from several people is invaluable. Would you mind sharing a bit about it, please?
Well, I like to keep things simple. The one thing I've learned in business is, yes, give the customer value for money, but also make life simple for the customer. Don't make it complicated. And I can be booked for doing speeches at events. And funnily enough, when I talk today, it wasn't the speech I do. In my speech, I don't talk about how I built Ratner's into a 2,500 shop chain, the biggest jewelers in the world. I don't talk about that at all, because people are not, if you go to an event, they're not interested in that. They're interested in my downfall. And so I give the customer what they want. It would be nice to talk about success, but they don't want to hear about that. People are much more, you're much more fascinated if somebody goes for a walk and slips on a banana skin and falls on their bottom than if they didn't. People like to hear about calamity.
Nothing changed since 1991 then.
Nothing changed. So I give them what they want. In terms of my mentoring, I mean, if anybody just wants to contact me via LinkedIn for one-to-one, I love doing it. I've been doing it all day today, helping people. Strangely enough, a lot of them much richer and more successful than me, but nevertheless, they like to chat about my experience and what I can add. And I've always felt that the best way to expand is through acquisition, because you're taking out a competitor, somebody's life's work. Why start from scratch the whole time when you can do that? It's an incredible situation. So I help people go from a 2 million business to a 10 million pound business through acquisition or whatever. So, and also to deal with setbacks. So just contact me via LinkedIn, direct me, or email me at gerald@geraldonline.com. I'd be delighted to chat. and I'm not expensive. I always give value for money in every business that I've been in.
So Gerald at geraldonline.
We've just put his LinkedIn.
Oh, thanks.
Yes.
Gerald at geraldonline.com. Thanks.
geraldonline.com.
Thanks for the
right.
free plug.
Yeah.
And
last
and
question from me. Sorry. So
Yeah,
obviously, you and I, we've spoken quite a few times over the last months, and so I know you clearly not done yet. So what does the next chapter look like for you, and maybe what still drives you at this stage?
Oh, well, it's you just when I did go through this very bad time, which you never get over, 7 years of just not having any money at all. And I can tell you that is really a terrifying situation. So I'm just happy. I'm not the ambitious person that I was, trying to be the biggest in the world, because somebody will always be bigger than you and more successful. So it will always end in tears. So I just appreciate what I have. I like doing my speeches because I make people laugh. I enjoy making people laugh. That's how I got into trouble in the first place. I enjoy my cycling, which is 25 miles a day, every day, because when you get to my age, 75, you've got to keep using your body and you've got to keep using your brain. Otherwise, you'll just go to pot. So, the answer to your question is, Marek, I just want to survive and carry on doing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to take over the world anymore. Those days have gone. I tried that. It didn't work. So
can advise other people.
It worked.
Advise other people on their aspirations. All right, a couple of questions that have come in. So, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if somebody was setting up a new business and they wanted to set up an advisory board, get some smart people around them to help advise them, do you have any advice around that? Who you should get around to?
yeah, don't bring in any advisory board or bring in anybody that's going to cost any money or do all of that sort of stuff. You have to travel light. And what I've always had is a two-way door policy, which I think Amazon started. And I did this with the health club. Basically, I put the building, which I hadn't acquired, into solicitors' hands with no way of having the funds to complete it. And I started selling membership. So what I did is I walked through the door, and if I didn't like what I saw and it wasn't successful, I could walk straight back out again. Too many people, when 8 out of 10 new businesses fail, walk through that door and they are stuck. They've spent so much money, they've got offices, they've taken staff, they've done all this sort of work, and they've lost it. They can't walk back. So you can always get into a situation where you're in a two-way door. You walk through, it doesn't work, you can walk out without losing too much. All I would lose with the health club was the advert that I put in the Henley Standard for 200 quid, advertising a health club that didn't exist.
Sure. And a couple of last questions. So Joshua asks, what would you do differently if you could do it over again? I'm not sure if he means the whole career or just the speech.
Funny enough, the answer to the question, obviously, he wants to hear is that I wouldn't make that speech at the Albert Hall. And when I do a speech, I often deal with Q&As, and I always plant a question with the boss of the people who employed me. And the question is, do you regret saying what you said at the Albert Hall? And so I tell him to say that. He stands up, he says, do you regret saying what you said? And I say, that's the most stupid question I've ever heard. Of course I regret it. I lost everything. But then again, I've got enough money now. I'm happier now. I've learned a lot of lessons. I actually don't know if I regret saying what I said now, which is quite a remarkable thing to say when you think it was the biggest corporate error of all time. But it's given me a really good life. It's like a scar. You begin to love it because it's part of you. It defines you. It's a strange thing,
Interesting.
but it's part of me.
So Daniela asks, or says, basically, thanks for so much wisdom. She asks, how do you leverage today your weak ties to still add value with your experiences? Like, you obviously have met a lot of people over the years. You're still very well known. I'm sure, you can still pick up the phone to most people. How are you leveraging that?
Well, I I'm not really leveraging it at all. And I'd say one thing that we were talking about taking advice from people, and some of the biggest mistakes people make is because they've gone along and not really thought it out themselves. They're the best person to make those decisions, not somebody else. And I don't want to name drop, but my two best friends who I had lunch with last week, Charles Saatchi and Michael Green, who ran Carlton TV. And I used to play snooker with them, which I mentioned in my book. And they were like very, very successful and they're expanding. And I copied them to a certain degree because I wanted to be like them. And I look back now and however successful they were and however clever, and they're two probably the cleverest people I've met, I should not have copied them. If I should have just stayed the business at a reasonable size with Watch to Switzerland, H. Samuel Ratner's. I didn't need 2,500 shops, 200 or 100. I once went to a psychiatrist, funny enough, after obviously when I made the speech. And, I said I got 2,500 shops. He says, well, you're no happier than the person with one shop. And I think you've got to know when to stop. Otherwise, it just gets ridiculous.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the Saatchi's was an incredible story. There's a great book. I think O'Reilly was the author from the Financial Times, wrote about them. But what's interesting is Martin Sorrell was their accountant.
Yeah, he was the financial director. Yeah,
financial director.
Charles used to say he was the cleverest person in this company, which he was. Yeah,
right, and then went off and did WPP. Yeah.
He's a very clever, very, very clever. And they all were in those days. I mean, nowadays, everything's AI. In those days, they used to use their brains a lot more and made decisions by the seat of your pants, not AI. But anyway, I'm now showing my age.
I mean, just on that, because as somebody that sort of grew up in that era, and the UK, for all that was kind of a time of unions and everything else, there were some incredible entrepreneurs came out of that time. Globally successful, the Bransons and Anita Roddick, I mentioned the Saatchi brothers, WPP. Where do you see, like, the UK gets a lot of criticism these days?
Quite rightly.
What do you think has changed in the last sort of 40 years that's different from the 80s in terms of that?
Well, I think in this country, people are not taking the risks that they were taking. And I think that you've got to accept that 8 out of 10 new business said fail. But the point is that if you back the winners, your odds are much more than 2 out of 10. You will probably multiply your investment by about 200 times. So you've got to accept that if most of your investments or what you back fail, it doesn't mean to say that you're going to lose money. Yes, fail by all means, but that's the route to success. And I think the reason that the US is the leader in tech is not necessarily because we've got some clever people here on tech, very clever people, but they don't get the funding like they get in America because Americans take a risk, and business, when it comes down to it, is all about risk. I took tremendous risks. I was very successful in the UK. I went to America, and my investor says, Gerald, go to America in all means, but if you fail, we will turn on you with venom. But I didn't care. I took that risk and I enjoyed it. That's the excitement of business. Nowadays, and I don't want to have a go at accountants, at financial directors, but I will, and bankers, they want everything on their spreadsheet guaranteed. And the one thing that I hate more than anything in business is people who think there's certainty, because there is no certainty. They have this no humility or hesitation in saying, well, this is what you're going to achieve, and the bank say that's your profit and all that. They don't know. We don't know. There is no certainty in life. There's no certainty in business. That's what makes it great. The fact that we don't know.
Yeah. Gerald, it's been a fantastic time. I could spend hours chatting with you about business, but I'm respectful of your time. You've probably got speeches to get off to, and so we've got lots and lots of very positive comments coming through in the chat. I think everyone got huge value from that, and I think it's probably worth rewinding and watching the whole video again and taking lots of notes. So yeah, and any last throwaways from you for our audience?
Well, I won't make any jokes to get myself into trouble. I'll try and avoid doing that. Try and learn from my lesson. But the beauty of situation that I'm in, whatever I say, whatever bad things I say, I can never get into any more trouble that I'm already in. So I'm one of those few people who can say what I like.
Cool. Awesome. Well, look, thank you to Gerald. Thank you to everyone that's been watching, putting comments in, asking questions. That's fantastic. Thank you to everyone that watches the recordings. Do keep putting comments in below this. We'll be checking them. And yeah, follow Gerald on LinkedIn, connect with him. And if you want some very unique mentoring from someone that has really been through it, then reach out to him directly, and that would be an amazing opportunity for anyone. So cool. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for asking me.
Thanks, Marek.
Bye-bye.